This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandiver.
Welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandiver, and my special guest today is Kevin Monroe. Kevin is a leadership consultant, executive coach, speaker, and the author of Profiles of Purpose, Stories of High Achievers Who Chose a Higher Purpose. Kevin is an expert on servant leadership, and he helps organizations and individuals live into their higher purpose. He has worked with organizations such as Oracle, the National Park Service, the Project Management Institute, Foundation Medicine, correct me on the pronunciation of this, Sopra Steria?
Yeah.
And many, many more, of course. Welcome, Kevin, to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Pleasure to be here with you.
Now, as you know, we get it started by asking our guests some quirky questions to get to know them a little better as individuals.
Okay.
So my first quirky question for you is, tell us about your favorite guilty pleasure television show.
Wow. I wish I could say I have no guilty pleasure television show that I just watch I read War and Peace and, all the classic literature books. But I do. When I think of television, I'm a real fan of classic TV. Andy Griffith Show.
Oh, my.
The Beverly Hillbillies. Like, if they're ever on, I'm stopping to watch. But of current... shows like The Blacklist, the thriller types get me hooked.
Okay, I've never watched that one. What's that one about?
Oh, FBI agent trying to save the world and gets framed and then has to clear her name, and there's a criminal that turns accomplice to the FBI, and it's an interesting show.
All right, just another show I have to get hooked on now. All right, our second quirky question is, tell us, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Are you hearing it?
I am not.
Okay, let me turn this down a little bit. Maybe that'll help. So, second quirky question, tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah. Okay. I couldn't settle on one. So, in a former life, I sold cemetery property.
Get out of town.
I was, I think, maybe 18 or 19 years old. And in the small town that I grew up in, I would help out at the funeral home on days of funerals when they needed a third person. I would show up and drive the hearse. And they took me into selling cemetery property, gave me the book on it. I read the book. I sold 2 plots, and I was done.
So how does one happen to start driving hearse for the local funeral director and selling plots?
You grow up in a small town. Those things happen.
Very cool. Now, are you going to tell us another one too, or
oh gosh,
you're going to stop with that one?
No, probably the best thing I have in my past that most people don't know is senior year of high school, maybe freshman year of college. Myself and 3 friends rescued King Kong.
Okay. Tell us a little more.
So the movie King Kong had come out. And I grew up in a small town of Perry, Georgia. We had to go to the Macon Theater to see the movies. And, they had like the big 12, 15-foot cardboard cutout out front. It had been abducted and stolen. I mean, this is making the newspaper and stuff in our little town. And one Saturday afternoon, 3 friends, 3 of us were in Macon hanging out for the afternoon because that's what you did in small town. And we decided to go up to the top of the Hilton, which is only like 12 floors or something, to see the city. And as we turned the fire escape to go up to the top, there was the King Kong cutout sequestered. So we call, report it. They send the Macon Telegraph comes out, takes our picture. We're on the front page of the Sunday Macon Telegraph for rescuing King Kong.
Oh.
So, I mean, how many people can say they rescued King Kong?
That is like big time. That is like big time news. That is hilarious.
I've never told that in any setting like this. So when you ask something no one knows, other than John and Steve, which were with me when we rescued him, I don't know if anybody still knows that story.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Permission to Speak podcast is bringing you exclusive information.
That's right. Scoop.
That is great. Okay, thank you for sharing both of those stories, Kevin. Shoot. All right, and now a little deeper question as we transition over to the content that we're going to talk about today. So, when was the first time you really got how important leadership was and what a difference it made in people's lives?
You know, that's a question I've thought about a lot. And I thought my answer was unique until I was in grad school studying leadership at Gonzaga University. And in many of the opening classes, some version of that question was asked. And sadly, most of my classmates had the same experience. We discovered the need for great leadership having endured horrible leadership. You know, just working under a really bad boss and asking, is that how this is supposed to work? You know, are you supposed to try to make people miserable every moment? You know, and it's like, there's got to be a better way. So it was really experiencing some really bad leadership that created this desire. I mean, in my very first job, you know, at a small town motel restaurant combination thing, I won't call the name. It's a national chain, but, you know, it was the franchise there. I mean, we had bosses that just loved to berate people in front of other people. And there I was, 16 years old, and looking and saying, this isn't right. Yeah. You know, that's not how you treat people. So even then, now it was several years later before I really experienced good leadership and began to really appreciate it. But at that point, I knew something was wrong.
So it wasn't until grad school wasn't the first time you started thinking about it. No. But so you had some good leaders then before you went to that route. So
yeah, and I have said this more than once. I will say it here. So this is my experience, Kelly. My experience, which is what I can speak from. Most of the really great bosses I had happened to all be women.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting. Do you think there's a correlation there for some reason, or?
Well, that is not to say that all female bosses I had were really good. But when I think of the standout bosses that I personally worked for, most of them were women.
Now,
see, I love to mix it up, and that throws somebody like you off because you don't think I'm supposed to say that, but it's true.
Well, were there any men that were really good leaders that you worked for?
Yes. But I have to say, I mean, some of the absolute worst were men. And I don't know if it was, I know part of it is an ego thing. Part of it is an insecurity thing. You know, proving yourself, getting off on power and dominating or domineering over other people. Experienced some of that. But I had a couple of men, bosses that were quite exceptional. But if I were to kind of make the list, I would say more of the better bosses I had just happened to be women than men in my life.
Interesting. Now, I don't know if you've read that research of teams, and one of the commonalities of great teams was, among other, there was 2 or 3 things, I think, but one was they had women on them.
Yeah.
You know, it was just kind of a weird thing.
Yep.
That was one of the only statistically significant things was that they had women. So we're taking over the world.
That's
Kevin,
right.
you know?
That's right. Hey, I'm happy for it.
Okay. Well, in your introduction, I mentioned that you're helping. You've written a book about high achievers and them living into their higher purpose. So tell us a little bit about that and what that means and what that work's all about.
Wow. So, Kelly, we none of us are here by accident. None of us. I mean, there is a design on our lives. There is the opportunity. I never want to sound sermonic, or if that's the right word. But the wisest man, the man known to be the wisest man ever lived, Solomon, King Solomon, said that God has planted eternity in the hearts of men. And so there is this longing. And so the way I understand that eternity is that longing for purpose, for meaning, for significance, not just success, but significance in life. And to me, that's the higher purpose. Years ago, when I had first started my company, and a company came along, we had the ability to do government contracting. This company said, "Hey, we would love to partner with you." And in a conversation, I'm like, "Well, okay, tell me, what's the purpose of your company?" And they thought long and hard about it. And they said, "To make as much money as we can." And I'm like, "Okay, thanks. I'm not interested in being a partner with you, because there's more to life than making money." Right? Yeah, I don't know of anybody who on their deathbed said, "Gosh, I wish I'd have spent more time at the office, put in a few more hours of overtime so I could have made more money."
Yeah.
So to me, that higher purpose is really finding meaning, finding fulfillment and significance.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it happens for organizations as well as individuals.
So with individuals, how do you help people focus on that? Or is it just so individualized, there's like no formula per se?
Well, no, there is a formula. I don't want to say a formula. I don't like the word formula with it. I think there's a path that you can help people discover. And I think in reality, and this also applies to servant leadership. One of the things I realize when in the work I do with servant leadership, we help people realize it's a journey. And I remember you mentioned Project Management Institute in the introduction. I've had the opportunity to facilitate their what's called a Leadership Institute Masterclass for them. And that they bring together about 35 leaders from around the world. The first time I did it, there were 36 leaders from 19 countries. Last year, I think it was 15 countries represented.
Yeah, we had a little technical glitch there. So can you start with, you last year it was 15 countries, and then we kind of lost you. So if you could pick it up from kind of there.
Okay. Yeah, one of the participants from Norway, she and I had connected in a conversation on LinkedIn messaging. I'd reached out to everybody in the class, invited them to my LinkedIn community to get to know them. And she replied, said, "I can't wait for October to start this journey." And I remember responding to her, "I've got news for you. The journey's already begun." And the same thing with higher purpose. Most of us have been on that journey for a large, if not all of our lives, a significant portion of our lives. We're searching, we're looking for something. So part of it is trying to help people identify or discover the clues. What is it that you do that you lose all track of time doing? You start doing something and all of a sudden you're just lost in it, and somebody comes by, or your partner comes in, husband, wife, say, "Hey, it's time for dinner." And you're like, "What?" It was 11 o'clock last time I checked. Well, that's a clue, Kelly. That's a clue. The things that anger you, what is it that gets that righteous indignation fired up? What are the things that you're just, you keep thinking about? What is it that you do if you won the lottery, or, whatever it is, you cash out tomorrow, you don't have to work, money's not an issue. Most of us are going to want to do something. What is it? That's when you start finding out, wow, this is what I'm really wired to do.
So, how does that connect with an organization's higher purpose? How do people discover, can they use their higher purpose where they're at?
Sure. There's some great companies that really connect people to purpose and passion. And they are all about their purpose. I think of a company, and gosh, it is so amazing that it has been 3.5 years since I had this first encounter with the company. And I was tweeting with the guy from the company last weekend. I mean, it's a hotel. It's the Heathman Lodge, Portland. I go in, things start off not that good. A couple of things aren't so right with my room stay. And, I call the front desk and I say, hey, I was supposed to have a king size room. I've got a queen. It wasn't that big of a deal, except it was a handicap room with no desk. And I'm going to be there for 4 days. And I was counting on working 3 hours in the morning, being on Pacific time. And they said, well, Mr. Monroe, sorry, we don't have any rooms. And a few minutes later, a guy knocks at the door. Not rings the phone, knocks at the door. He said, Mr. Monroe, here's a key to your new room. I've got the baggage cart. Can I help you move? Now, Kelly, I don't know how many times you've had the experience where you're changing a room at a hotel, requesting that. I've done it several times. Something doesn't work. The room's not clean. The air conditioning's broken. And every time that's happened, here's how it goes. Hey, Mr. Monroe, yeah, we got a room for you. Come down to the front desk, swap keys, then go up and move your stuff, and then come back and bring us the other key, right? I mean, that's how it goes.
Right.
At Heathman Lodge, here's a guy at the door with the baggage cart. Let me help you move.
Nice.
I'm like, wow. I was there to speak at a conference, and the conference had these little buttons. The conference planner had this button that just said need service. And I'm asking Jay Keith, the conference planner, I said, tell me about this button. He goes, well, they just brought it here, and they said, if I need anything, I push the button and they show up. I said, push the button. Let's see what happens. Kelly, that's the kind of guy I am. So Jay Keith pushes the button. 30 seconds later, a guy shows up. He said, what do you need? I said, tell me how that works. I want to know how this works. Well, it's tied into our two-way radio system. And whoever is closest to the meeting room, when the button goes off, comes and responds. The meeting planner does not get up and go look for somebody. The meeting planner does not ring the phone and sit on hold and try to find the right person.
Yeah.
We make it easy for them. So I take a picture of this button. I tweet it. I'm saying this place is amazing. This is service just out the wazoo. It's amazing. And then my tweet gets retweeted, and it's the Brian McLaren. He's the VP of Revenue Development for the hotel chain. We start chatting. He says, well, I'm at this hotel. All of our executives work on site at a hotel, so they're in touch with the guests. They're not sequestered away at the, ivory tower.
Yeah.
I said, can we talk? So I go and I meet the guy. Now, 3.5 years later, off this one encounter, we're still Twitter buddies. And we still connect and stay in touch. But it was amazing. And what he ended up sharing with me, they have they call it the Heathman Treaty. It is a document. And he gave me a copy of it. I asked for it, and he said, sure, you can have a copy. It's their credo of customer service. And it says something like, the question of whose job is it to satisfy the customer will not be asked here, because it's everybody's job every time to satisfy every customer. Nobody says it's not my job. You read all of that, you sign it, and then only if you sign it do they even give you an application.
Wow. That's
Right.
cool.
So this is not, let's get you on board. I was talking with a company the other day, telling them this story. And they said, what happens in most companies is you get to orientation after you've been hired.
Right.
And then somebody hands you the culture or somebody hands you the value statement. And then they begin trying to inculcate you into this, hey, here's how we do it here. Well, they do it quite the opposite.
That's
Southwest
very cool.
Airlines is a company that does the same thing. I know the gentleman that was Dave Ridley was the senior vice president of business development. He said, people ask me all the time, how do you train people to be so nice? And he goes, we don't. We hire nice people and we train them the skill for the job, right? We hire for fit, train for skill, where most companies do the opposite. They hire for skill and then hope there's some kind of values fit. So higher purpose companies use purpose to recruit the people. And it's like a magnet that draws people into the organization. Oh, I want to work for you.
Right. And so that's how people kind of, if they're lucky enough to come across those companies or to seek them out, smart enough to seek them out, that's how they can live to their higher purpose or be in an organization where they can.
Well, there's a company here in Atlanta, Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. Cheryl Batchelder's the CEO. Through my work with servant leadership, I have been fortunate to become a friend with Cheryl and get to know her. They actually do workshops to help their employees discover their purpose in life and then help them connect their purpose to their work. And you know what? People thrive when they're working aligned with their purpose.
That's amazing because the old story is, right, you have to be careful about talking about purpose with people because you might lose them.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to bring you in to do workshops if people are going to go out the door, but they don't find that happening.
No.
Then.
Well, I don't know all of that.
Right.
I'm sure there's some people that found that their purpose wasn't there and left, but they might have left anyway for other reasons.
Yeah.
But they're happy, right? When people are working in alignment with your purpose, whatever that purpose is in life, when you're working in alignment with it, you have higher levels of engagement, higher levels of energy. You show up to work, you show up on time. According to Gallup, a lot of the research they've done, the number one indicator of employee engagement is how much voluntary effort do you get? How far does somebody go above and beyond? It's not discretionary effort is the word they use, right? It's not, well, yeah, we're grateful. We paid them for 40 hours and we got 32 and a half this week. That's really good. No, these folks that are thriving in their purpose, they're saying, I've put in my 40. This project still needs to be done. Let me stay. Let me work a little more.
Right.
That's the discretionary effort.
Very good. Very good. So, you've mentioned servant leadership a couple of times in our conversation. How would you describe that to somebody who's not familiar, and what attracts you and others to that mindset?
Well, the way I describe it, it's kind of funny. Robert Greenleaf, here's the classic essay that kicked off the global movement known as servant leadership. This was an essay self-published in 1970, long before self-publishing was, the way people publish books. Robert Greenleaf wrote this essay in 1970, printed 200 copies of it, sent it to some friends and said, what do you think? And then now all of a sudden, there's a global movement of servant leadership touching virtually every continent. And it's an amazing movement. But what's interesting, in all of the work Robert Greenleaf did, he never really provided a succinct definition. And I have another friend, Jim Laub, who is a professor who ended up crafting a definition. And then since there is no formal definition, I've created my own, that it is a people-centered approach to life and leadership that puts the needs of others ahead of those leading. The needs, the growth and development of people, the growth and development of others ahead of those leading. Right. So it's not just a business philosophy. Notice I said it's a philosophy of life and leadership. If people are serious about servant leadership, they don't go to the office and, I think of it like Mr. Rogers going in and, putting on his sweater when he comes in, changing his shoes. I'm going to be a servant leader now. Zip up. They pay me to be a servant leader while I'm here. And then at the end of my shift, I take that off and I go home and I'm a real jerk. No, if you're a servant leader, it's 24/7. It's 365. It affects how you parent. It affects how you're a partner to your spouse. It affects all areas of life, right? So it's the other key in the definition is that servant leaders are focused on the growth and development of people and meeting their needs, not their wants. Right? Really addressing, and so now you kind of have to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow and Robert Greenleaf were contemporaries doing their work at about the same time. So Maslow's beginning to think about this hierarchy, that you've got to really take care of the basic needs of food and shelter and clothing. And only then can people begin to think about other things and work towards higher level needs. And his highest level was self-actualization, which Robert Greenleaf would just call servant leadership. That, at the pinnacle, I'm now taking care of others. And I'm not just leading others, I'm helping to develop them that they too become leaders.
So we've kind of grown up in an American culture where profit and as particularly in publicly traded companies, being held accountable by Wall Street and the analyst and, yada, 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 has become kind of this is what we do. This is the way that we should do things. And servant leadership sounds extremely different than that. So how does one answer the critics that say, being nice to people is fine, but this is business, and we've got to have make our revenue numbers and yada yada yada? Well,
there are a lot of places to look, and fortunately, there are a lot of researchers around the world who have been doing research on this for a number of years. I'm not one of those. I am not a researcher. I'm not even sure how you conduct legitimate research. I think it's more than asking your three best friends, do they like what you're wearing today? I don't think that counts as research. But I'll give you two instances. One of those is just look at Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines is in one of the most competitive industries out there, the airline business. And Southwest Airline is the only airline to be profitable every quarter of its history. Year after year after year, 40-something years now, Southwest Airlines has been profitable. And what Southwest Airlines, and so I don't know who all is in the audience that will be watching this podcast. I know it's broad, but when I think of like customer experience folks, which is an area that I see is there's so much overlap. And you and I both have friends working in that space, and some of them have brought me in and allowed me to work in that space and introduced me to that. Southwest Airlines knows this to be true, that if they take care of their employees, then and only then are the employees empowered, and not only empowered, but emancipated to take care of the customer, and the customers take care of the profits. I mean, that right. is their model.
Right.
So the other place I would take you is if you look at the Fortune Great Places to Work list, it's actually called the Fortune Best Companies to Work For. The research is done by Great Places to Work Institute. They've now done this 16 years. There are 15 companies, I believe, that are called Fortune All-Stars. These are companies that have been at the top of their game, extremely profitable, been at the top of that list or in the top 100 every year the list is done. So there are 15 companies that are considered Fortune All-Star. These are companies like SAS, companies like Wegmans Grocery, companies like W.L. Gore. And then another company on that list, TD Industries out of Dallas, Texas. But it's interesting, out of these 15 companies that are Fortune All-Stars, a third of them, a third of the All-Stars, have a written embrace of servant leadership.
Wow. Wow.
Right? So, I mean, you look at that and you go, these are some of the best companies out there. These are companies that are doing it right and doing it well year after year after year. They're making the Fortune list. They practice servant leadership.
Right, right. So what about that manager that may be listening to this and wants to be a better leader, wants to, likes this idea of servant leadership or believes in it, already knew that it was something that was right, but they don't see it up the chain of command. We've heard this story before.
Oh, yeah.
So what advice would you have for that person?
So, man, when you asked that, all of a sudden I had a backflash. If you saw me for a moment, it was a backflash. It was to 2 years ago in the Leadership Institute masterclass that I do for Project Management Institute. That's such a great environment, and I get to spend 3 days with this very small group in an intimate setting, get to know people. And I believe it was like afternoon of the second day, we're in this discussion, and folks were doing some exercises, really answering some of the questions like you started with, looking how they understood leadership, how they learned leadership, who were the people who first impressed your understanding of leadership. All of a sudden, this lady just has this eureka moment and is, some kind of shriek or cry of excitement. And I walk over, I said, "Do you want to share?" And she goes, "You know what? At that moment, she was working for one of those bad bosses. And she's sitting there in this group. She said, I had this epiphany. I don't have to have a great boss to be a great boss." I was like, wow. And so Robert Greenleaf actually wrote something about this, talked about how a leader, a manager, can basically, through their servant leadership, hold an umbrella over their group, is how I envision this. That's not the phrase he used. But, I knew this guy, did a lot of contract work with a government agency, and one of their leaders frequently said this, excrement flows in a southerly direction. Your folks are smart enough to know what he was really saying. Well, when that happens, the servant leader just has a way of shielding the people that are under them from that excrement that's flowing from higher up in the organizational chart in companies that don't get it, right? So you don't have to have a servant leader boss to be a servant leader boss. You can choose to lead that way, in your sphere of influence. We think of the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. They talk about bright spots. And many times, companies like this, that company where the divisional leader, I know a company, I won't call names, the company is not known for a servant leadership mentality. The CEO is certainly not regarded as being a servant leader, but this senior vice president was. And his division was what the Heath brothers would call a shining spot, a bright spot in the organization. People wanted to go there and work in that division. Why? Because the culture in that division was different. Now, it probably takes some extra effort in an organization that doesn't embrace it from the top down, but it is possible.
So what are some of the keys of servant leadership from a practical perspective? Yes, we want to help, take care of people or help them develop, but what does that look like in the day-to-day kind of ground? Or maybe you can use some examples from some of the folks that you've worked with.
Well, having studied, and I first learned servant leadership like 30-something years ago, pretty early in the servant leadership lifespan. And I didn't learn it from Robert Greenleaf first. Somebody gave me a book and somebody was talking about servant leadership. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And that influenced me some 30-something years ago. And then I discovered Robert Greenleaf and read all of his books. So what's interesting is, there are a lot of different approaches to servant leadership. And sometimes the lists get very long of all the things you need to do to be a servant leader. And I'm like, I just don't buy that. As I tell a good friend of mine that I happen to do some projects with, the world needs more servant leaders, not less. We ought to reduce the barriers to entry, make it real easy for people to get in, not make it hard, not give them, a 17-point test and can you check off all of this? And, earlier this year, back to Project Management Institute, I was working in Norway doing presenting to Project Management Institute Norway about servant leadership. And we were at the National Gallery of Art. I was keynote speaking at the event. And so I had several months to prepare, and I was really working on this because we were at the National Gallery. We're talking about the art of leadership was their theme for the day. And then I really started thinking about the artistry of servant leadership. And in that mode, somewhere along the way, I stumbled into really thinking in terms of primary colors. If you were to try to reduce servant leadership down to like 3 things, not 17 things, not 12 things, not 10 things. I have some good friends that I have a lot of respect for. James Sipe and Don Frick, they have a great book. It's the 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership. And that's a great improvement over 52 or, 17 or 12, 7. But I started thinking, what if you really could reduce it to 3 things? The primary colors. And I love this idea of primary colors because if you look in the world of art, all the colors we see come from some blend of red, yellow, blue. Primary colors gives us everything we need. And so here's what I would suggest. The way I think about it now is that three fundamental elements. Again, I'm not a researcher. So some of the researchers will probably come along and say, gosh, you can't really distill it to 3, but I'm working. I'm using the 3, Kelly. So I think of it as empathy. This is a fundamental skill when you look at servant leaders and Brené Brown, Daring Greatly and Rising Strong, yeah. And all. I'm just a big fan of Brené Brown, and she has given a lot of insight into empathy. Right, empathy is not sympathy, but empathy is really just being able to see, experience life from the other person's perspective. And really great leaders have that ability. And that, to me, that's a fundamental part of servant leadership is empathy. And in so many of the writings, you see that. So empathy would be one. And really just the desire, the interest to really care and think about what is it that the others are experiencing. I mentioned Cheryl Batchelder before. I've really been greatly influenced by some of the things she's done. And she goes, I can't know everybody in the company, but I can know someone at every level in the company. And she's been very intentional about doing that and getting to know people. And then, having this real, she wouldn't call it this, I don't think, but a focus group kind of relationship. And you get to hear from folks at those different levels all the time because you're in that relationship. So empathy would be one. The second that I just believe is so key is listening. And Stephen Covey helped us with this. He said most people listen with the intent to reply, not the intent to understand.
Right.
And then another great servant leader, CEO that I've met along the way, Gary Ridge of the WD-40 company. He takes that a step further, and I love what Gary says. He said, listen with the intent to be influenced.
Wow.
That as the CEO, I'm not the end-all, know-all, be-all of the company. And the people with the most knowledge of the situation are those closest to it, those people on the front line. Mm-hmm. So if something's going on here, hey, What do you see? What do you think? What do you experience? And listen.
So how does he get that? When you're the CEO, I've heard it described as having that bubble around you. People are less likely to tell you things. So how does a servant leaders like the ones you're talking about, how do they kind of bust through that bubble?
Well,
and so they can listen. They want to listen, but how can they?
Yeah. There's several things that I think are important, Kelly. One, yes, you bust the bubble by breaking down the hierarchy in the organization. This company you mentioned in the introduction, Soprasteria, that I had the opportunity to work with when I was in Norway, a very flat organization. Anyone can go to any other leader in the organization about an issue at any time. And you know this with your military background. We see this in the United States. Chain of command. You can't go talk to someone. They're just much flatter. There's an organization here in Atlanta, Jim Reese. He is the CEO of Atlanta Mission. When he first came in, it was his first experience leading a not-for-profit organization. The organization had one of these headquarter buildings. They have a lot of field offices where the work's really done, and then they have headquarters building. In his first 3 months at the job, they rebranded. Headquarters became Mission Support Center. Right? That's that. Let's flip the organization. You are not here for us. We are here for you. Mm-hmm. Right? So some people call that flipping the pyramid. But however, you've got to bust that somehow. To get out of the bubble, you have to bust that. And this is being very intentional. It's being very relational. It's not just having. I remember when I worked at a massive bureaucracy, skip level meetings. It's not about a have to skip level meeting. It is somebody. Okay,
explain that a little bit. Skip level meeting. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, okay. Say if you are, so you're just the employee. You report to a manager. The manager reports to a director, who reports to a senior director, who reports to a regional director. Okay, so skip level would be that the director or vice president, senior director would come meet with the humble people on the front line.
Okay, gotcha.
That's a skip level, and I'm not talking about let's just once a year let's have a skip level meeting. The rest of the time I don't want to. I told you I work for a company that the big shots had the big offices on the top floor, and they had their private parking lot and their private elevators so they wouldn't have to encounter the riffraff. There's something wrong with that. I love the CEOs who see, hey, we're all on the same team. I just have a different function than you. And we're all in this together. And there's CEOs. You mentioned Foundation Medicine. When I first went in the office, they're in Cambridge, Mass. Walk into the office, and I'm just walking around. I'm like, there's something different here. The CEO wasn't in the corner suite. The CEO's office wasn't removed. It was in the middle of the room in a clear glass big cube, big office there in the middle, surrounded by glass so they could close it off. But man, what does that communicate? There is transparency.
Yeah.
Transparency. I think of another CEO, Rich, wrote Joy Inc., Rich Sheridan, Menlo Innovations out of Michigan. And Rich, a software development company, they have or working stations, desks that they can relocate as needed by project and reconstruct the office. And the team decides where Rich needs to be working. The team, I'm serious, Kelly. And the last time I spoke to Rich, he said to me, he said, well, Kevin, he said, the last time they put my cube by the door, I'm not sure what that was telling me. You know, they're trying to get him out. But that's a different way of looking. That's a different way of operating. And these are folks who they take their work seriously. They don't take themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
You know, and they create these cultures. I think of another story I heard from Dave Ridley, Southwest Airlines. He said on his very first day of work, his boss says, "Oh, it's pizza night." He goes, "What's pizza night?" Well, Herb Kelleher, CEO, comes by and sits down. He goes, "Well, what time will it be done?" He goes, "Who knows?" You know, sometimes it's 7:30, sometimes it's 8, 9, and Dave was kind of like, "This is weird," you know. The CEO came and he just talks about everything going on in business and life, and is very transparent and very relational. And Dave said, I walked out of there thinking, man, this is a great place. You know, this is a great place to work. It's being intentional, finding ways. The other, let me go back to the third piece.
Right.
Which this is where it gets really important. We talked about empathy. We talked about listening.
Right.
The third piece, I believe, that fundamental element is authenticity. And that really goes back to what we're talking about now. A leader has to find out what's authentic for them. What works for me, you know, and I'll give you a story. I will not tell company name or CEO name because he did not share the story with me. Somebody on his staff shared this, but I thought self-awareness is another one of the key elements of servant leadership. This is a picture of self-awareness. The CEO did not receive affirmation from his father as a youth. Quite the opposite. So he had never received affirmation. He wasn't really good at affirming other people. But he knew affirmation was important. He had a daily practice. When he left home in the morning, he had 3 pennies in his left pocket. His goal was to transfer 1 penny to his right pocket each time he had an encounter and gave a meaningful affirmation to someone on his team. And his goal was at the end of the day for those 3 pennies to make their way from his left pocket to his right pocket. Okay, that's authentic. That's not contrived. That was something that works for him.
It was important to him, so he found a way to do it, even though it wasn't something that came naturally to him.
Yeah, so this is where it's really important. Finding what works for you as a leader, what feels right and what works, so that you're not. The thing I see so important in all areas, but especially for leaders, to be a voice, not an echo. You know, find your own leadership, not be the parrot of someone else. We all know people like this. We all know people that get a job and all of a sudden they're a mini-me of the VP or the CEO, and you're like, wow, you dress differently now, you talk differently now, right? They're mimicking them. Find your own style. Find what's authentic for you, and you know, let it be real. I think about in grad school, I read this book by Parker Palmer, a great educator. The book was The Courage to Teach. Our professor said, substitute teach with lead and lead for teacher everywhere. This is a great book on leadership. And he talked about when he was in college being influenced by a professor and watching this professor's technique. And then when he went to his first classroom, mimicking the technique, and it fell flat when he tried it. It was just a technique. And that led Parker Palmer on this journey. And what he found out was he lacked the alignment, which I would also, the authenticity. What you do outwardly is authentic when it is a reflection of your inward desire. So when I look at authenticity, it's this intersection of values, intention, and action. You know, that when you see those, if you think of a Venn diagram, when somebody's intention aligns with their belief system, their values, and it results in action, people look at that, it's authentic. Right. It could be, what you do that is authentically you may be very different for me. You know, I'm a hugger. I just grew up in the South, grew up in church. You know, you meet people, you hug. And so for me, that's not contrived. It doesn't feel awkward. I know other people, it's not authentic for them.
Right.
So find what's authentic for you. Make it yours and lead that way.
Very good. Very good. So you said you came across servant leadership, years and years ago. How did you come across it, or did you see it role modeled at any time?
Oh, yeah.
Early in your career?
Okay, so I will tell you how I came across it. I don't remember who recommended the book, and I don't even remember the guy's first name. I remember his last name was Irwin. But it was a faith-based book. It was called The Jesus Style. And he talked about Jesus as, being a servant leader. And this was written in the 80s. So this was in the heyday of churches really growing and becoming mega churches and having the reserved parking space right out the front door for the pastor, because God forbid that he'd have to walk so far. And I remember one of the things Irwin said in the book was just that, I can't see Jesus having the reserved parking space at the temple, right?
Right.
You give that to somebody else. You right there. I mean, that's the whole thing. Servant leaders put others ahead of themselves. It's as another friend of mine describes, it's a mad dash to the back of the line. Or as Simon Sinek said in his last book, leaders eat last, having been embedded with the military, with the Marines. The officers eat last. They want to make sure the enlisted men, those that are doing the heavy lifting, they're taken care of first, right? I mean, those are all servant leadership experiences. So experiencing servant leadership, reading books, getting really interested, reading more books. What I start to say, Kelly, what's so interesting to me in so much of the work I do, the very first session I ever did on behalf of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, the organization that perpetuates the works and the legacy of Robert Greenleaf. I helped them launch a consulting practice 4 or 5 years ago. First session we did, we were in this beautiful hotel outside of Phoenix working with the board. And at the end of the day, and I always ask people this, in a survey, what's your level of familiarity with servant leadership? And, you always get a pretty large portion that go, never heard of it. Servant leadership's done a terrible job marketing. You get a few people that go, oh, yeah, I know something about it. And then you get even fewer people that go, yeah, I'm familiar with it. At the end of the day, so this was a group that no one had any familiarity with it. At the end of the day, one of the evaluations wrote, I love this, these concepts fit us like a glove. And that's been the experience I've had in so many companies, so many organizations, so many sessions. People have never heard of it, but servant leadership describes how they want to lead. When they hear it, they go, that's me. That's how. And so we actually usually lead people to discover this through questions like, hey, when you think about the most admired leaders you've been influenced by, the most admired organizations you think of, when you think of those, list characteristics, and you get all these long, think of the best boss you ever had. And people, those characteristics are always servant leadership, always. But people didn't know the label. People didn't know the name. So my belief is when you help people discover the framework, when you help people learn that they can do these things consciously and consistently rather than sporadically and accidentally, that there really is growth, there's change. The culture that then begins to be cemented around servant leadership. So it's this, having understanding and insight and knowing, thinking back, wow, that meeting went so well because I listened more than I talked. Huh.
Do you find the experience that, like you just described, more often, or do you ever get with a group and they go, now I understand what I've been doing wrong? do any of those bad bosses ever listen and say, oh, maybe I should try this because what I'm doing now isn't working?
group. We were starting the session, asking the group. They could answer one of two questions: why are you part of this organization, or why are you in this meeting? What drew you? Because it was, well, up to this point, I thought it was largely a voluntary attendance meeting. This one gentleman was sitting right in the middle of the room. He said, I'll answer both questions. And I don't even remember what he said to why he was with the organization. I don't think I'll ever forget why he said he was in the meeting. Obviously, the people that report to me think I need to be here. And my boss put it on my calendar. That's why I'm here. Wow. Thanks for your honesty.
Yeah.
To which my next response is, hey, I want to put you at ease. We're not here to convert anybody. Our goal is not to say, well, let us strong arm you to become a servant leader. It doesn't work that way. That's the other. I say this, Kelly. There's not just one way to do servant leadership right. There are several ways to do it wrong. One of those is to do it by edict. Effective January 15th, 2016, we are now a servant-led organization. And all of you, boss holes are now servant leaders. Signed, CEO.
Doesn't work.
Nah, doesn't work. But I think when you really, the other thing that we almost always start with is asking people around aspirations. For probably 12, 14 years now, I learned about this approach to problem solving, or it's not really an approach to problem solving, but it's appreciative inquiry. David Cooper Ryder from Case Western Reserve University, we kind of discovered this along with Diana Whitney, that the questions we ask lead us down the path we travel. And so if we ask, what do you really want? What do you aspire to? We pull out the higher purpose. We pull out the, bigger picture rather than what's wrong here. So we don't start with what's wrong here. Let's tell us how bad things suck in your company today or your department today, right? I mean, that just mires people in this inability to change. But if we either ask in the future or ask in the past, when you think about the best boss you ever had, that's an appreciative inquiry type question. What was it about them that made them so great? You go, you're thinking of the best they do. Well, and Kelly, I've done these surveys so many times now. I mean, they listened, they encouraged, they saw me capable of something I didn't think I was capable of. They told me to go for the promotion that I was scared to go for, and I got the job. They had me present to the executive team. Right? I mean, all of these things, you can just go down the list. Yep. You see all of these things. They developed people. They encouraged people. They invested in people. They developed people, blah, blah, blah. The bad list. Because we do these surveys all the time with companies before we go in there, and you create word clouds. So you get the montage. Here's the best leaders. Then after we teach or introduce people to servant leadership, we'll compare these. Mm-hmm. The best bosses we've ever known, whether they use the word or not,
right,
were servant leaders. The worst bosses we experienced were all about themselves, all about power. The things that make that list. Micromanaged. I mean, that makes it every single time. Took credit for other people's work. I don't even remember which company this was, but this was a recent one. Drank on the job.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm like, what? I hope he's no longer with the organization. That's a problem. That they were abusive of people, that they abused power. They amassed power for themselves. They hoarded knowledge. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you compare the list.
So the guy that had the outburst in that last, So what did he seem to have any epiphanies during the time you were together?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he did. I don't know what's happened to him in the 3 years since, but yeah, he was like, "Oh, I kind of I see how I could do better." Um, Unfortunately, in that encounter, we were just there doing this introductory module for this company. That's the other thing. It's a journey. It takes a lot of support, right?
Yeah.
The companies I see that really do this well, they have these ways of just encouraging people. It's a constant discussion. When companies prioritize values, one of the things I see that's so great, and I had a friend that helped me discover this, that they would start their meetings by saying, okay, since we were last together, how have you seen our values? Where did you see our values in action?
Wow.
Right? That's how they start their staff meeting every week.
Wow.
Where do you see our values in action? Oh, wow. You mean they're more than just that plaque on the wall, that has our values? That page in the employee handbook, right? No, they're part of our ethos here, our DNA. And so we talk about them all the time. Folks like that, they get it, right? They're listening. They're hearing we value. So a couple of weeks ago, well, this has gone on for months. I've had trouble with my sanitation pickup. The company was bought out. And I have over here, one day I'm on hold for this longest time, right? And on their on-hold music, I'm on hold for 15 minutes because I made a note. During that 15 minutes, Kelly, I promise you that I heard their values repeated probably 20 times because they were less than a minute. They're coming across this, and the company goes, we act like owners. We value the environment. That's how the values are at so many companies. They just have these statements. We do this. Right. So the person finally answers the phone, and I'm saying, I actually say this. I said, they said, how can I help you? I said, yeah, my name's Kevin Monroe. Here's my account number. I said, you know what? I'm just going to give you a moment. Look at the notes and you tell me why I'm calling. And they, we missed a pickup again. Well, I don't know what happened about that. That's not my department. And I'm like, I just heard your value statement over and over and over again. We act like owners. That's not how owners act, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the disconnect we see at so many companies. There are these values that nobody really can remember what they are. But the exceptional companies, they live the values all the time. And people go, yeah. There are a lot of companies now that are kind of, let's get rid of the annual evaluation.
Right.
So some of the companies we've been privileged to work with, they're looking at how do they replace those with developmental conversations. I mentioned there's a great book. People that are listening, that if I mentioned Gary Ridge earlier, Gary Ridge has this Helping People Win at Work is a book he co-wrote with Ken Blanchard. The subtitle is just amazing. Gary's an Aussie. Don't mark my paper, help me get an A. And their philosophy at the WD-40 company is, if you are a manager and one of your direct reports gets something less than an A, they look to the manager, not the employee. And Gary, he said, man, I hate the bell-shaped curve. And, we've got the standard distribution, so we can only have so many high performers in our company. Yeah. He goes, never once have I walked into HR and asked, have we hired our quota of losers this month? So if that's not how we hire, then why do we score people like that?
Right. Exactly. I agree. I've always hated that forced, bell curve thing.
Yeah. So they have these developmental conversations. There's a conversation at the beginning of the year. Tell us about your dreams, desires for the year. Okay, here are the company goals. What would a performance look like for you this year? And they mark it. What do you need from me to get you there? All of this. And then they have quarterly conversations. Right? It's not just this one time. And so at the end of the year, people are moving in that direction.
Right.
And the last time I talked to Gary, he was telling me they have, at that point in time, I think their employee engagement, if you know Gallup's, right? Gallup's studies are abysmal. WD-40 Company had 94% employee engagement.
I've never heard of such a thing. Oh my gosh.
So,
wow.
It happens like that. I mean, it's where it really is put to action.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Kevin, you've spent a lot of great time with us, and we've got covered a lot of great ground. But my last question before I see if there's anything else that you want to add to the conversation, what in your journey in this higher purpose for individual and servant leadership and higher purpose for organizations, what's been one or two of your pleasant surprises along the way?
Wow. A couple. First, because you asked, I'm going to tell this story. A couple of years ago, we were with a small group. This was the top salespeople of this organization, people from all over South America. It was the South American division of a group. And we did just a half day on servant leadership. And our work, we design it to be very interactive. This is not sit and come listen to somebody lecture. It's very much facilitated discussion, lots of table topics, and drawing out the best. And I watched this gentleman that was right there at the front right, the table to my front right. He was engaged from the get-go and just really excited, on the edge of his seat, sitting up like what I was trying to think, what's the Boston Symphony Orchestra? Xander.
Yeah.
One cheek playing. This is the guy that's there. He's all in. He's so leaning in. He's on the edge of his seat. He came up to me at the end of the session, and he said, "Kevin," he said, "thank you." I said, "Oh, no, I want to thank you. You do workshops. When somebody's really engaged, they energize you." I said,
yeah.
No, thank you, man. You are engaged. I loved it. He goes, "No, thank you. This changed my life today." And I'm kind of like, whoa. I said, "We got to talk. What do you mean this changed your life?" We don't have comments like that too often in sessions. I mean, this is corporate America. This was an IT firm. This changed my life. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well," he was from Mexico. He said, "All of my life I was a scout. As a scout, I was taught to leave the world better than I found it. Mm-hmm. I go through scouts all of my life. I age out, go to college. Out of college, I get a job, and then all I hear, it's about money. It's about money. It's about money. It's about performance. It's about performance. Today, servant leadership helped me discover how to connect both.
Oh, nice.
I now can feel that I live an integrated whole person life. That changed my life." Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's mind-blowing. I think the other thing is just how many people are doing what you've done. Is we've talked, they're nodding their head. You're talking about this. Yeah, that's how I want to be.
Yeah.
That's how I want to be. I didn't know there was a way to do this. I didn't know there were, things you could do consciously and consistently and be better at it and all this. And so it's just really, for me, it is fulfilling. It's fulfilling to help people be better. Mm-hmm. There's a company, People Power Corporation out of Wisconsin. They have a video on their website. And this is one of the characteristic moments, right? It's a lineman, a guy that, is out in the field working and not highly educated individual. Their company practices servant leadership. And on this video that, I don't know if it's still there, it's 3 or 4 years ago they had it there. This guy talked about, man, when I came to work here, I learned about servant leadership. It made me a better father. So this is something back to that 24/7. Yeah. What people learn at work, man, they carry home rather than going home at night, and that kick the cat syndrome. They go home at night. How can I serve? How can I, get involved with PTA? What can I do for my family? I get to do that for a living.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Kevin, before we wrap up the podcast, is there any other thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience, that just something that you're passionate about in this area that we just haven't touched on yet?
Oh gosh, you got another 2 hours now. There is so much I could say. The thing that I would really, if anything you've heard in our conversation, resonates with you at any level, take some step of action to develop that. Just don't go, oh, well, that was nice. That, find someone to discuss it with at work. Get involved in something. Find a book or take some action to where you are actually moving forward on this journey to discover your higher purpose. If I can give a shameless plug, I actually have on my website a little higher purpose pathway, 5 questions that you can answer that will help you discover, hopefully, something. It doesn't get you all the way, but it gets you started on the journey.
Very good. Well, we'll definitely include that as a link in
Sure.
our show notes for that.
Well, Kelly, this has been most fun. Thank you.
Ditto. I always enjoy hanging out with you, Kevin. You know that.
Yes. So,
well, thank you again for joining us and
Sure.
and sharing your wisdom. And was there something else you were going to say?
No. Gosh, we'd be here another hour if I got started again.
Well, thanks again, Kevin. Great to have
Thank
you.
you, Kelly.
All right, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandiver, at 770-597-1108.